that we have a full complement of the Public Accounts Committee present. And let me first of all call the committee to order at 10:11, according to the clock in front of me. First of all, let me thank the members for finding the time to come to this hearing, and also the Financial Secretary and the Chief Accounting Officer, the new Auditor General, Ms. Sue Winspear. Welcome to our first public hearing, and Mr. I'm not going to try. He's from the PwC, right? And your name is Mal Bispal. Okay, all right. Thank you very much for coming. Members, I wish to make some general comments before we invite the witnesses inside. Regarding the role and the importance of the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee is one of the most important standing committees of the Cayman Islands Legislative Assembly, if not the most important standing committee of the Cayman Islands Legislative Assembly. We have a very important role in that we are the oversight committee for government expenditure, and we review the Auditor General's reports and other financial accounting that may be submitted to the Legislative Assembly for tabling. It seems that there are people who regard an invitation to attend the Public Accounts Committee as a witness as a rather trivial invitation. And we get reasons, excuses that they have other appointments scheduled for that time. The expectation of the Public Accounts Committee and me as chairman, and the reason we give 7 days notice, the expectation of the Public Accounts Committee is that anyone invited to appear before this committee as a witness will clear their calendar and show up as and when invited. To respond to that invitation, to say that you have appointments scheduled, and even when the public accounts, as we have done in this case, makes an effort to accommodate the witnesses by rescheduling the hearings, on the second round of invitations, we get the same response, that we have appointments for that time. Let me state clear that, first of all, the fact that you are at a level in the government service or in a government entity, whether that be a statutory authority or a government company, to which you would be invited as a witness to this committee to address the financial matters of the entity. We would expect, we would hope, we would pray that you have appointments, because that's what we pay you for in your role as in management in one of those entities. But at the same time, as chairman, I expect that when you are given an invitation 7 days prior, the things that you will rearrange are the appointments that you have with other people, and not expect the public accounts to rearrange its schedule to accommodate you. And certainly, when we acquiesced to that request, to be told a second time that you have other appointments scheduled is unacceptable. what is likely to happen in that event is that we will ratchet the invitation up to a summons to appear. And we try not to go to that level, but we have done it in the past. And I want the people in government to understand that there will be absolutely no hesitation on my part, unless the committee says otherwise, to issue that summons to appear at the required time. And for anyone who studies parliamentary procedures, a summons by Parliament is equal to or above a summons to the Grand Court. The committee, in its role as oversight for government expenditure, cannot tolerate this kind of disrespect for an invitation to attend the Public Accounts Committee. It is not helpful, in my view as chairman, to start out with that kind of adversarial positioning. I can remember as a civil servant, you got an invitation to attend the Public Accounts Committee. You were shaking in your boots. Now, part of that, this newfound disrespect for the Public Accounts Committee might be that the Public Accounts Committee has been too nice and have lapsed into us being the accommodator and not the witnesses having to accommodate us. So, and this is not confined to Cayman. The Public Accounts Committee, anywhere in the Commonwealth in particular, takes the same stance. And the role are similar. The expectation of us as elected representatives to perform our function of oversight is a very serious one. And I would, at the very least, encourage witnesses who receive an invitation to attend the Public Accounts Committee to make every effort to accept the invitation in the first place and to attend when and where invited, because we want to work together to improve the management, whatever concerns have been raised by the auditors in terms of changes, and to improve the whole functioning of the government entity with regards to what has been reported to us as a Public Accounts Committee. So I would invite the Financial Secretary, who's here representing the government employees, and to please inform the powers that be within the government service to communicate to management within the service, within statutory authorities, within government-owned entities, to make every effort to accommodate invitations from the PAC to attend the committee, and impress on them the importance of coming here and answering questions and making representations on behalf of the entity that they manage. I don't know if any other member wishes to make any comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You obviously spoke to me, and good morning to yourself and committee members and the clerk. There's no doubt about it, Mr. Chair. We listened quite closely and carefully to what you just said, and it was obviously said in a very serious tone. And so I will do as you say, sir, make it very clear to civil servants via the Deputy Governor's Office as head of the civil service, and also to extend that out to the statutory authorities and government companies of the importance of the attendance at PAC on time and the first time. So your comments are well understood and taken seriously. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, through you, and just to echo that point, because as you know, I recently was in the UK at a Public Accounts Committee training session under the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Authority, and that was one of the stresses there. And when you spoke to the different Commonwealth countries, and you realized, with the power that the Public Accounts Committee has in some instances, I mean, in some of them, they have the power of arrest. It is time as a country that we take it seriously. And we've had a history in the not so recent past that there was no Public Accounts Committee meetings. There were, if there were scant. And I think you were right, sir, in my opinion, to re-emphasize what it's supposed to be and not what people have grown accustomed to, and to get back to that kind of straight and narrow.
Mr. Chairman, through you, before moving on, Mr. Chairman, I just want to have it recorded that I am the counselor for the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism and Transport, which has responsibility for Cayman Airways. So I'd just like to have that recorded in the minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will ensure that it is so recorded. I will now ask the Sarge to bring in the witnesses from Cayman Airways, because we will be dealing this morning with the tabled accounts for Cayman Airways ending the 30th of June 2014. Would you sit in the two front chairs? No, here, in the green chairs. On the end of the front row, please. Good morning, and thank you all for finding time in your busy schedules to attend the Public Accounts Committee. We are dealing this morning with the financial statements for Cayman Airways Limited, dated the 30th of June 2014. As usual, we will invite the Auditor General to make some opening remarks on the accounts.
Okay, that definitely sounds better. I was just saying it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here, so thank you very much. Cayman Airways Limited, as you know, is the nation's airline which was incorporated in 1968, and undoubtedly you all know its main activity is the provision of scheduled passenger and cargo transportation to, from and within the Cayman Islands. Cayman Airways Limited presents its financial statements in US dollars, so during my address, and I'm sure the proceedings throughout, everything will be stated in US dollars. The airline's total income for the year ended 30th of June 2014 was 87.7 million, of which the most significant components were 58 million, or 66%, in passenger revenue, and 21.2 million, or 24%, from the government. The government choose as a policy to fund the operation of some routes that they deem are of strategic national importance for tourism or domestic travel purposes. The airline's total expenditure for the same year was 88.6 million, of which aircraft fuel costs of 22.2 million, some 25%, and staffing costs of 20 million, some 23%, were the most significant components. So for the year, Cayman Airways Limited recorded a loss of 918,000 before finance costs, and after these, comprehensive losses were $2.4 million. Although members do not have the benefit of having the 2014-15 financial statements before them today, these in fact have been signed off by me and are waiting laying in the Legislative Assembly. I can report for the year ended 30th of June 2015, the airline's total income had increased by 1% to 88.3 million, of which 59.2 million, or 67%, was from passengers, and the same amount as the year before, 21.2 million, or 24%, was received from the government. Expenditure was 83.7 million, of which staffing costs of 20.7 million, or 25%, and aircraft fuel costs of 17.5 million, or 21%, were the largest components. This meant that the airline achieved an operating profit in 2014-15 of 4.7 million before finance costs, and a comprehensive profit after finance costs of 3.6 million. On the balance sheet side, the airline is quite indebted, with net current liabilities of 57.5 million in 2013-14 and 48.6 million in 14-15, giving weak current ratios of 0.12 in 2013-14 and 0.19 in 14-15. For non-accountants, the current ratio is a liquidity measure, which just shows how well a company can service its immediate debts from its available assets, such as cash in hand. And obviously, a ratio of 1 would show current assets matching current liabilities. So ratios under 1 are considered weak, as liabilities outweigh current assets. It's worth noting that within the current liabilities figure is 21 million in the 13-14 accounts and the exact same amount in 14-15 accounts, which is due to Cayman Islands Airport Authority. Cayman Airways Limited has been in the process of working with the government in renegotiating the terms of repayment of debt owed to various related parties, of which the 21 million to the Airport Authority for past airport landing and parking fees is the biggest component. Non-current commercial loans payable are 29.3 million in 13-14, reducing by 17% to 24.2 million in 14-15. Another point of interest recorded in the financial statements is the decision taken in consultation with the government to restructure 3 of its 4 aircraft lease agreements, changing them from operating leases to short-term finance leases in 13-14, and then during 14-15, supported by government equity, Cayman Airways Limited repaid those short-term finance leases to enable them to secure outright ownership of the 3 aircraft. Cayman Airways financial statements for the years ended 30th of June 2014 and 30th of June 2015 both have unqualified audit opinions. However, for both years, it has been highlighted in the auditor's report that the Cayman Airways Limited is dependent on the financial support from the Cayman Islands government to enable it to continue its operations and to meet its obligations as they fall due. As Auditor General, I contract out some public sector audits to firms, and the audit of Cayman Airways Limited financial statements is undertaken by PwC on my behalf. And this morning, I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Marlon Bispath on my left, who is a partner from PwC. He's here to support me during this session, and he has a number of years of experience of having Cayman Airways Limited as a client and leading their audit. He will be delighted to answer any detailed questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Winspear, for those opening remarks. We'll now open up to questions to the committee. I guess based on the, I'll make a few comments. I think that we wish to congratulate Cayman Airways based on the input from the Auditor General that the financials appear to be trending in the right direction. Having said that, I think we still have some questions regarding the operation and the governance structure and how those things are isolated and protected. I'll open up to questions by the committee. I have some questions as chairman, but I'll let the committee go first.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Winston. Oh, by the way, when you're asked questions, whoever decides to answer the question, on the first time, just identify who you are and what position you hold in Cayman Airways, but for the record.
Mr. Chairman, through you, I'd like to echo that and congratulate the board and the management on the unqualified audit financial statements. It shows that you're taking these things seriously and doing a good job. So kudos to you. In reviewing the financials, and I think this is more for the benefit of the listening public, because we've had in other settings some explanations as to what those are. On page 24 of the financials, we talk about the immaterial nature of the cost of providing employee benefits, and for both the board and current and past employees, and that there's no kind of breakdown or record of that. And I think that it's important for the listening public to know what these benefits are, just what the number per annum is, and just an overall summary. And I think that's important in this setting.
Good morning to the committee. My name is Paul Tibbetts. I'm Chief Financial Officer with Cayman Airways. As you rightly stated, we do provide employee flight benefits to our staff. That is typical and that is consistent across the airline industry. Every airline does that. It's a way they can provide benefits to their staff without really incurring a lot of additional costs. Our staff contribute to their own pension, so they have the 5% taken out of their salary. They pay their own health insurance as well. So there are those costs that they incur, and this is a way that we can provide a benefit back to the staff without incurring any real cash expense to us. Across the course of the year, about 250 tickets are used from our board, dependents, and retired board members. And we have about 3,000 that's used for staff, their dependents, and retired staff as well.
Just to confirm, you have 250 persons who are retired board members who receive benefits, travel benefits,
No.
and 3,000 staff members?
No, sir. Those are the average number of tickets per year that are issued for those benefits that they receive. Currently, we have about 420 staff members and a board complement of, I believe it's 13, including ex officio members.
Go ahead, Winston.
And in terms of averages, cost-wise, or if you put a dollar amount to that, what would that be?
We've done the math on it, and adding an additional body, single person, to the aircraft doesn't incur any additional costs to providing that. The aircraft is going to fly anyway. The weight from a single individual doesn't provide enough, which is why it's considered immaterial here. It doesn't provide a meaningful additional cost to the cost of that flight getting between here and where it's going. So that's why it's considered immaterial. So it's difficult to put actual cost on it. What we do is staff are only allowed to travel on a standby basis, which means that if those seats are sold, they simply do not fly. When that plane takes off, the seats that are not sold at that point are wasted. We can't do anything with them. We can't go out and try to sell them at that standpoint. That is the only moment, and it's within an hour of departure, where our staff are able to, if there are seats on that flight, able to take advantage of that, because otherwise they're going to go wasted.
And my final question on this is, those benefits are benefits for life then of ex-employees, family members. You know, that's why I said a summary of like what the actual benefit is for both sectors, the board, the past board members, current staff, former staff, and I guess extended families. Sure.
Staff members, depending on how many years tenure they have with the airline, get a certain number of these flights. So if you've been with the airline less than 6 years, you get a certain number. If it's been 6 to 10 years, you get a certain number. If it's 10 and more, you get a different number again.
And what are those numbers?
Off the, I think it's 6 if you're less than 6 years. It's 10 if you're on between 6 and 10, and I'm not sure what it is if it's over 10. Unlimited. Right. So that's for active employees. Retired employees, once they retire after 20 years of service with the airline, once they're eligible for retirement, they retire in good standing, they're able to obtain a similar but slightly different set of what we call retiree benefits, in that they can get confirmed seats but at a slightly discounted rate. They can also travel space available, standby, with a fee attached to it at that point.
What is the amount of the discount?
It's approximately 75% of a standard fare.
Approximately.
Correct.
75%.
I can get you the exact numbers off the top of my head. I believe it's about 150. Then that doesn't include taxes, so that would just be the actual fare itself.
No, help me here. I don't know anything about airline business. A retired employee who would be an employee who would put in 20 years, you get full retirement benefits after 20 years of service.
You get the retiree benefits, yes, sir.
Yeah, after 20 years.
After 20 years.
Okay.
And that's the only retiree benefit they get. They get no health coverage. They get nothing after that, other than what they've contributed, and we've matched to the pension plan.
But you mentioned that they all contribute to a pension plan, so they get their pension plan that they paid for.
Correct.
On which you match.
Correct. They get that back.
In addition to that, they get tickets at 75% discount in the way the airline flies.
No, it'd be a 25% discount, a 75% of the cost.
Okay.
Sorry, my apology.
And how many, when you say dependents, how far does that extend beyond the actual employee?
Immediate family only, so spouse and dependent spouse and dependent children.
Dependent children mean children under age 18 or still in school?
Under age 18, if they're above 18, and under 22, if they're enrolled full-time in school, they're able to get the benefits.
And is there any limit to the number of those tickets per year?
Depending on where they are in terms of how many years they've been with the airline. As I shared up, if it's less than 6, there are limits. Less than 10, there are limits. If it's over 10, then there are
but that's current employees.
Correct.
We're talking now about retired employees.
No limit. There's no limit for retired employees.
No limit on the number of tickets that they can buy at 25% discount.
Correct.
For confirmed seats.
Confirmed seats for themselves and their immediate family. Yes, sir.
Board members, do they enjoy similar benefits, or do they get additional benefits?
So board members get no monetary compensation for their time sitting on the Cayman Airways board. In exchange for their time serving with the airline, they get flight benefits. Those flight benefits for board members, unlike staff, it is actually a confirmed seat that they can get. They get that for themselves and their immediate family as well. After they leave the board, for the period of time they served on the board, they're able to continue getting those benefits. So if they served on the board for 3 years, for 3 years thereafter, they would also get the benefits, and then they would cease.
So while they are board members, they get confirmed seats free.
They get the fare is waived. The board members pay the taxes, yes, sir.
They pay okay. Yeah. After they retire, they only get those benefits for the period which they served on the board.
That is the policy has been in place now since, I believe, 2009. Prior to that, it was a lifetime benefit they did receive.
How many people are getting lifetime benefits as board members, and how many board members are getting based on the time that they served on the board?
Based on the time they served on the board, that would be, I'm going a little bit on a limb here, but less than 30 for sure. Those board members who get lifetime benefits, I want to say that number is within 100.
You want to say, but is
I
less
don't,
than 100 is a big variance.
I can confirm that number to the committee. I just don't have it here with me.
Okay, we would want that specific information. Yeah. In actual fact, if you could submit to us in writing a complete package of the numbers of persons who get these retirement benefits and what they get. We don't need the names. We just need to know you have 10 people in the 6-year group, 5 people in the 10-year group, or whatever. And if possible, I know that you say that if they only get to fly if there are vacant seats.
Yes, sir.
Is there any substance to the general belief in the public that staff make reservations in fictitious names so that they know the person will not show up and they will get a seat?
That is specifically banned. So if someone is doing that, they will lose their flight benefits permanently. There's no question. That is not just a Cayman Airways policy. That is across the industry. If that happens, that is very strongly looked down upon. We have ways that we go through and track. It's called what we call firming flights, where we have different people in different parts of the company go through, look at how the flights are booking up, look at the names. There's also time limits in terms of which the tickets must be issued for reservations. So our team does go through that, and the chances of what you're describing happening would be very slim. Can't say that it will never happen, but we do have mechanisms in place to address that.
The more important question is, has it happened?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, through you, I know Mr. Tibbetts gave a number for the amount of tickets that employees could have after certain years of employment. Is there a limit to the amount of tickets that board members can have per year?
No, sir, there's not. It's unlimited for the board members.
What is the limit?
There is no limit.
There is no limit.
Right.
Thank you.
And do board members get first class seats or economy seats?
What the policy says that if there's first class available, they can be upgraded to a first class. The booking is actually made in economy, and then it's space available for business class.
Okay. What used to be called a subsidy has been converted to a strategic route support. How does Cayman Airways determine which routes they are going to strategically support with the $21 million that government gives them for that purpose.
Mr. Chairman, before I answer that question, which I'm happy to answer, the report to the Public Accounts Committee we had discussed for retired staff benefits. You'd also mentioned with regards to their tenure at the airline. So that tenure refers to active employees. Would you like active employees included as well? Okay, so make sure.
Mr. Chairman, before you actually move on to the subsidy, could I ask a couple questions with regard to the issue of the staff? I didn't know we were finished. You were finished with that.
My apologies.
Page 24 of your accounts, it talks about the benefits, the retirement benefits that you provide for your staff. And I do note there that you talk about a 401k for US-based, note 14 to the account, other staff costs. Your Cayman employees contribute 5% as required by law, but your US-based employees is at a lower rate because you've got a 401k plan. But is there any reason why you are providing a lesser benefit to them in the US than you are to your Cayman-based employees?
There's not a specific reason as to why it's differentiated that way. In the U.S., there are a lot of different rules in terms of how staffing is employed and what the legal requirements are on individual employers. We actually provide quite a bit more than what's required by law in Florida and New York, where we have our staff members. So the 3% is going above our legal requirements and providing them with a 401k plan. And our matching that is not a requirement, but it's something that we choose to do. Why it's a 3% versus a 5% as it is in Cayman, that's been a long-standing ratio, and I can't provide a reason as to why that was first established.
Okay.
But it's certainly something we could look into going forward.
Can you confirm then? Yeah, I think you said there are two gateways where we actually have paid staff. That is Miami and New York. Are there?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, and one in Tampa as well.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
So is that 3%? But let me phrase it this way: do Caymanians who work for Cayman Airways in Miami or New York or Tampa have the option to enjoy the 5 and 5, or are they forced into the 3% on the 401k, in that they, in all likelihood, are likely to retire to Cayman?
Yeah, I think if they're Caymanian, depending on where they're working, they would fall into that category of staff. So if they're Caymanian working in Cayman, they would get the contribution that is put in place here. If they're working in Miami, it would be what the Miami staff get. I'll have to confirm, but I don't believe there's a cap on the 401k matching, so we match that 3% indefinitely. There is a cap on the 5% up to a salary of $60,000. So that may help to offset some of that, even though I'm not sure that salary figures would have much impact there. But certainly we'll look at it and see if we can improve the opportunities for Caymanians working overseas. And to your original question, if we're ready to move on to the output payments now. So with regards to the output payments, there are two different categories. There's Cal 1, which is the domestic service, and there's Cal 2, which is a strategic international service. The domestic is develop the routing, the schedule, the aircraft, the entire service in conjunction with the Ministry of District Administration, with the Sister Island Tourism Association, and with the airline. So none of those decisions are made in a vacuum. They're made very much in conjunction with those parties working together. Similarly, for the international routes, we work very closely with the Ministry of Tourism, with the Department of Tourism, and any other stakeholders that may have an impact in that. We obviously have a a cost that we have to work with in those markets, but we work with the Department of Tourism and the ministry to look at the possibility of opening up new routes, to look at the possibility of strengthening existing routes, and also keeping tabs on where the fare is, because airline pricing is very much market driven, which means that when you put a price in the market, if your price is higher than anyone else, you won't sell a ticket, but if your price is lower, everybody else has to come down to that price, otherwise nobody can sell it, they won't sell tickets. So we're able to have some level of influence on the pricing of other carriers by simply putting a lower price into markets as well. So all of that is really part of the strategy that's behind how we decide what routes, what pricing, and so forth go into different markets.
Does administration, meaning you two, liaise directly with ministry? Or do you expect policy directives from the board? Where is the board involved? 'Cause according to your answer, it seems like administration works directly with the Ministry of Tourism, district administration, to make these decisions.
Sorry, I didn't mean to infer that if that came across that way. On our board, we have representatives from the Department of Tourism. The director sits on our board. We have the chief officer of the ministry as well on our board. So when we meet, when our board meets as a board, they're able to have those decisions in-house. There are times when the entire board or the Department of Tourism will need to meet with management to see if something is possible, see if a routing or a new schedule or something is possible. But generally, we have that opportunity to meet with the different departments through our board structure as it exists currently.
Who makes the final decision on what route will be developed? Is it Cayman Airways or is it the Ministry of Tourism? And what kind of information, research is Cayman Airways through its board expected to put into that decision-making process?
The decision is made, ultimately the decision is with Cayman Airways. That would be our board approving the starting of a new route. Recommendations come from a variety of places, and those are all evaluated through generally a very extensive business case for each of the routes. So in 2012, we launched service to Panama, we launched service to Dallas. Those two routes only happened after an extensive business case was put in place. The costs were looked at. If the costs were something where the airline was not able to bear it on its own, that would then be sent back through the board to the government saying, this route is possible, we have the facility to do it, but we can't afford the cost of it. And then government would decide whether they would like to fund that or not going forward.
So how is the figure of $21 million arrived at? Is that arrived at by Cayman Airways costing these strategic routes on a regular basis and determining what contribution government needs to make, or how is it arrived at?
Good morning, Fabian Worms, CEO of Cayman Airways. To answer that question, I would like to just elaborate a little bit more on the relationship between Cayman Airways and the government and how we end up defining and where it is defined, what that relationship is, and how we allocate the output payments that we receive from government. In our purchase agreement with the government, which is an agreement that's signed between the ministry and the chairman of the board representing Cayman Airways. So the relationship at that point is one between the board and core government or the ministry. In that agreement, it speaks about our airlift framework, and it speaks about 4 areas of operation. One being our core operation, which are routes that are defined as self-sustaining and profitable. These are routes that are done for the business sense behind these routes. It also defines routes that are not necessarily economical to run, but those are operated for strategic purposes. The purchase agreement will outline a certain number of flights and so on around that framework. And it is for that purpose that the output payment is applied. So in essence, what ends up happening is the 2 fiscal years that we're looking at right now, what you will see is that when we examine our core operations funded itself, and then where there's a shortfall on the strategic side of things, you will find that those numbers align pretty much on spot with the amounts that we receive from the Cayman Islands government in terms of output payments.
Is there a sliding scale employed, i.e., we're starting the route this month? Our expectation is that the subsidy will be 50% of the cost of a ticket. In 6 months of operating the route, we would expect that the subsidy from government can be reduced to 25% because the market is growing, or is it just left for the entirety of the operation of that route? Because when you look at the accounts, this amount does not seem to be going down.
Yeah. On an annual basis, it's reviewed. Throughout the course of any given year, there are lots of dynamics involved. There are lots of things that are constantly changing. In actuality, our output payments have been going down. Our CFO could, if you could remind me of the exact amounts, but I think from 13 to 14, it might have been 500,000.
Correct.
And then beyond that,
and before that, it had gone down 2%, and
right.
The year right now is going down.
500,000. 1 million, you mean?
No. Sorry, just to clarify that, it went down from 21.6 million in 2013 to 21.2 million, well, 21.19 million in 2014. Total reduction was about 500,000. And that's been coming down. We see more coming down now as well. It hasn't come down by the full amount of our profit, which is presumably what we would assume it would come down by, and that is the goal, to bring it down more as we go forward. The current fiscal year that we've just started now has come down again. But we do have a backlog of matters for the airline to address due to underfunding and due to not having resources in place previously, that we're also trying to hold on to some of those resources to pay. An example of that would be the Airports Authority and paying down that debt.
But the document produced by the Auditor General shows in 30th of June 2010, the output revenue from government was 10.5 million. 30th of June 11 was 15 million. 30th of June 12 was 15.7 million. 30th of June 2013 was 18 million. 30th of June 2014 was 17.8 million. 30th of June 15, 17.8 million.
Mr. Chairman, through you, if I could just clarify, the briefing I gave you before was in Cayman Island dollars and not US dollars when I gave you the briefing in the administrative meeting beforehand.
Okay, but it is still
sure
between 14 and 15 is the exact same figure. Whether it's it wouldn't translate in a different, because it's 17.805.88 for 30th of June 2014 and 17.805.800 is $8 less. So that's 10 US.
Correct. There was no reduction between 2014 and 2015.
And in addition to that, the 6 million that you get as a, what's it called, equity investment, that started in 2013.
I think it was 2012, but
okay.
So if I can explain where some of those changes came from. In 2010, you may have to forgive me if I mix some of my numbers up. I'm going a little bit off of memory here. In 2010, the board at the time took a very comprehensive look at the financial situation of the airline. At that point, we were very much in debt. We had a situation where our annual losses were exceeding $5 million every year, in some cases significantly more than that. And there needed to be a solution. One of the problems that was discovered through all of that was that for the last 10 years before, the airline had not been funded properly in terms of what it was being asked to do, the cost of doing that, and then the results. So what happened to the expenses after the airline was unable to pay them? what had been happening was the airline was running out and borrowing money on a very regular basis to try to cover the shortfall in funding that they had. In 2011, 12, the government of the day said, we will increase the output payment to compensate the airline for the cost of the services that are being asked of it. So that's where you see that increase in that one period. The other part of that then was, how do we deal with the existing debt that the airline has? Because at that point, the airline had a significant amount of debt that needed to be paid off. And that's where the equity injection came in. They committed that they would pay, over the course of 10 years, $51 million to get that paid down, $5.1 million per year. And you'll see our debt is going down. Our Airports Authority debt hasn't come down as much in the periods we're looking at. It has come down in 2016. And we do have a plan that we're working on with the Airports Authority and with government to have that fully retired within the next 4 years.
So the $6 million goes entirely to pay debt?
To pay debt. The debt servicing is the bulk of that. There's a small amount that does.
It can't. It either it's going there or it's not. It can't be the bulk of. You're using the $6 million for what government intended it to be, that is paying off debt, or you're using some of it for other purposes. If you're using the bulk of it to pay debt, then some of it is being used operationally. That's the question I'm asking.
Sorry, to clarify, it is all being used to retire debt. My distinction was simply on bank debt versus debt that we may owe to other third parties, such as the Airports Authority.
Okay, at what, since this strategic investment in new routes started in 2012, 2013, is it? How many new routes have been developed over that period of time, and what routes, if any, have come off the government subsidy?
So if I can maybe expand a little bit on that, the routes have been adjusted to better allow, with the approval obviously of our board and government, to ensure that the full funding is used adequately. An example of that would be where we increased the number of flights in 2014 to New York from an average of 3 per week to 5 per week. So without going back for any additional funding. At the same time, we reduced service from Washington, D.C. So one flight came out from Washington, D.C., and we put the flights into New York instead. The Dallas service, when we went in there, the funding was for a single flight per week, and we were going to do 2 flights per week to Panama. That funding came at the same time. Panama, within 2 years, I think, was reduced and eliminated from the schedule, but we increased the number of flights to Dallas to 2 per week. And you can see that's starting to have some reward with American now on the route. In fact, they put 3 flights a week in this last summer. And the number of tourists coming out of that area really helping the tourism product on island.
Okay. You say that Panama was one of these strategic routes that government funded, but it was stopped after 2 years. Was that as a result of lack of research to determine that that should be a strategic route? Or the question I'm asking is, how is a new route selected?
So back to my answer I gave a short while ago. Both, we'll use Panama and Dallas as examples. Both of those had extensive business cases to support the routes. In both instances, the airline felt as though there may be benefit to the country, but the airline on its own could not justify flying to either of those routes. So it was left as that, though, for the board, and then that was a board decision. Then government could decide what it wanted to do beyond that. Government came back, the government of the day, and said that it made sense for us to open those routes from a national perspective, and they agreed to provide additional funding for that. That did take place. Fast forward, I think 2 years later, the government of the then day thought that it made more sense to put that investment into a known market, North America, increase Dallas service, increase New York service, than it did to continue to try to develop a market in Panama and South America.
So the funds as part of the strategic development that were used for Panama after it failed, were then redirected to New York and Washington.
Were directed, well, I wouldn't say Panama failed. I think it was a policy decision. The route paid for its variable costs, which meant the airline didn't lose money on it, or lose much money on it. What happened was, with the policy change, the government decided that it made more sense, that we could get more tourism, more bang for your buck, so to speak, from the North American market than from the South American market. And therefore, once that was pulled out, the number of flights to Dallas increased and the number of flights to New York increased as well.
Get back to an original question. Having made a decision to develop New York as a strategic route, what scale, if any, is used to determine at what point can that investment that government is making into that route be withdrawn and spent somewhere else, or reduced as a government expense? And how long is it allowed is it ad infinitum that it'll be subsidized, or is there a time frame, as was obviously the case with Panama? There must have been a 2-year time frame that if you don't reach a certain point, we're going to discontinue it.
If I may elaborate again and go back to the airlift framework, New York being a strategic tourism route, as an example, the government is constantly looking at its return on investment. And one of the reasons why I happen to understand that the government of the day is very focused, for instance, on a route like New York versus a route like Panama, is that whereas Panama, as our CFO explained, would cover its cost and we did not operate it at a loss. So for Cayman Airways, one would think that is a good route to operate. Operating to New York at a loss, however, is better for the Cayman Islands. We actually measure what's called the strategic economic value, and we as Cayman Airways do this on a monthly basis when we look at our numbers, and we look at the number of tourists that we bring in, and then there's the wider effect of what we influence to come in. But we will look at the value of the tourists that come from New York and their spend on island. And we do this in consultation with the DOT, and it's shared with the government because this is the business of the board of directors. They're very actively involved in looking at this. And as long as the route justifies its investment from the government in terms of the return, then typically the decision to continue with the route, even though it loses money operationally, will continue. And there are no set time frames. There are no set time frames. It would be impractical to say, for instance, start flying to New York, do it at a fare of $299 US, because this is what will bring tourists to the Cayman Islands. If Cayman Airways then says at $299, we're losing $300 on each passenger. That's typically how it works. So we can't do it without receiving a payment from the government. The government then says, okay, we will fund this. As long as those metrics remain in place and the country sees the benefit, the typical spend from a tourist out of New York is $5,000 per person as their first direct expenditure input into the Cayman Islands. With the multiplier effect, it then increases. So you could have a family of 4 coming out of New York, and they come and spend a week in the Cayman Islands, and the economic benefit to the Cayman Islands amounts to $20,000 just from that one single visit. And what it cost the Cayman Islands to be in that game is the fact that we facilitated an airfare which made our jurisdiction attractive and affordable and probably chosen over another. So the tourist then comes to Cayman because the airfare is right. And that expense of $300 as an example to make that happen is well worth it. And as long as those dynamics remain viable and sensible, I think you would find that anyone would say that is something that we need to continue with. When that starts to change, then because it's constantly being monitored, then the notions now of should we stop or should we readjust or should we divert our investment elsewhere, that is how those notions come about.
Just to confirm, you're saying that a family of 4 coming to the Cayman Islands, who we possibly subsidize, the government itself possibly subsidized $1,200 of their airfare, will spend $20,000 in the Cayman Islands.
The economic impact for a family of 4 is estimated to be $20,000. The economic impact involves a lot. Their initial spend might only be $10,000 on their vacation, but the resulting spend that takes place within the economy beyond that, and the total impact from direct and indirect spend, it's estimated to be in the region of $5,000 per head or $20,000 for a family of 4, as an example.
If I could just add to that as well, those numbers are not numbers that we have made up at all. Those numbers come from a significant amount of research that the Department of Tourism has put into that. So they can tell pretty precisely how much an average tourist from New York is going to spend versus an average tourist from Dallas and so forth. And we have in the past employed companies like Deloitte to conduct economic impact studies, who have not only relied on that information, but also researched their own information to confirm those numbers.
Is there any idea, or has it been any calculation of how much of that 20,000 goes into government revenue to replace the 1,200 that government invested?
First, the numbers I used are not exact numbers. They are for illustrative purposes, but they are certainly in the ballpark. When the economic impact is assessed, and I'll go back now, for instance, to the studies that were done by Deloitte, which every 5 or 6 years we actually have them renew these studies. So I'm very familiar with the methodology that's been used because we review it constantly. What you will see is that they look at the impact in all respects, including the fees that end up going to government. When you buy an airfare and you come to the Cayman Islands, a certain amount of it is additional to the airfare. A certain amount of what you pay for your total price on your ticket is in addition to our airfare, and they are government taxes. So that is government's first siphon off on the tourist or the visitor, anyone who is traveling. And I think our CI taxes on any given ticket is in the region of about 60 US, Paul, right? Beyond that, for instance, the fuel that goes in our aircraft, there's government fees that are levied against that as well. There's so many, it's not a simple question to answer because it's not practical for me to list all these things up. But what I can tell you is that from that economic impact that's received from a visitor, the government certainly also receives in many different ways a return on their investment as well. And there are things, for instance, such as the tourism room tax, the hotel room tax, all these things are affected. So I wouldn't be able to tell you the exact amount that if the government contributes 300 towards an airfare, then one thing we must also remember too is that, let's say we are on the New York route, which we are, and we maintain a fare that is below 300 US, which makes it viable. That fare will even prevail on days when we don't fly to New York because another carrier would not, for instance, charge more than the benchmark that we have essentially set. So Cayman Airways is a wonderful tool in that it can be used to influence what all the carriers do in terms of their pricing, even if we're not competing on the same days.
But the government would get the tax whether they subsidize the ticket or not, once the ticket was sold, right?
Provided the tourist gets here first. That is the whole point of it. That is the government's logic. If the tourist doesn't come here, because when the tourist does their comparisons and they're shopping around and they says, you know what, a vacation in Nassau may cost us, a family of 4, it may cost us $1,000 less than coming to the Cayman Islands. So it's all a matter of how do we get competitive. It's a strategic approach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you. How do other islands or countries in the region address this? I know we're unique because we're one of the few with our own airline, but is this a normal practice within the region?
Well, the countries that do not have their own national airline to use as a tool, they're at a severe disadvantage. And I think, Councillor Hugh, this is something you have experienced and seen for yourself as you have dealt with, colleagues within governments or your counterparties within various governments throughout the region. What typically ends up being the end result is that the governments of other countries end up having to give seat guarantees to airlines to maintain service, or even make payments to these airlines in order to have the service provided at the right price point. Otherwise, they're just left out of the game. And this is a known phenomenon.
Okay. Are there any of those countries that are spending for those purposes of either guaranteeing seats or paying the airlines, spending in the region of $21 million?
If I can add one point to that, Bermuda as an example, and this report I think was from 2 or 3 years ago, was paying WestJet in excess of $3 million for one flight a week from Toronto.
Per flight?
Not per flight, for the year.
For the year?
Yes, sir.
For one flight per week, for an airline that makes no other economic contributions to the Bermudan economy. They employ no staff. They don't have 300 employees in Bermuda. There's a whole bunch of things that has to be looked at. It has to really be looked at holistically. And I think our government historically and continues today to do a good job of looking at the big picture and where Cayman Airways fits into the equation to be used as a tool.
On your employee health insurance, are you using a private provider or are you using government insurance?
Cayman Airways has always had a private provider. We still do. At this point, as has been the case in recent years, we're again looking at the possibility of using Cynical to provide us with our health insurance. But the manner in which we're looking at Cynical is competing with the other private providers as well that we're looking at. What we are hopeful of is that one day there will be a Cynical plan which would not just be specific to a single entity, like what we've been quoted from Cynical now would be specific to Cayman Airways. What we are hopeful of is that at some point we could be all umbrellaed into one large plan where the risks are spread across a broader pool and it brings lower rates and savings for everybody. But that is not what obtains right now.
Okay, how do you handle your employees with medical expense that their health insurance does not cover?
I am not aware of any situations now where there's any significant shortfalls in terms of coverage. I think what we have tried to do is we have tried to have the levels of coverage that would not cause that situation to arise.
So your plan, private plan, doesn't have limits such as 25,000 per episode of illness, 100,000 per year, and what is your lifetime maximum?
There are limits, but I'm not aware of any of those limits ever being met or ever being hit.
But I think to answer your question, if an employee does go over that, we don't have a facility in place that would address that. We would look to work with Synico and with the government and do whatever we can to assist, obviously. But right now we don't have a standing facility that would be there to assist with that.
In other words, it would present a new scenario, and it would have to be on a case-by-case basis how we would address that. And I'm not speaking about situations where there is a deductible and the employee is not able to meet that expense. We're purely speaking about a situation where, for instance, as an example, there is a lifetime limit for particular type of treatment, which might be $1 million, and the employee has hit that cap. We're not aware of that happening.
What is your current deductible or copay with your private plan?
It varies depending on what the specific illness and situation is. Generally, it's quite a good plan, and the lifetime limit is $2 million, so it's a good total limit. The deductible, I want to say, is about 1,000 or 1,500. Then it goes to an 80/20, and then after a certain amount, it goes to 100% that the plan covers. But I can provide the specifics of that.
For outpatient and inpatient, or is there a difference?
There is a difference, and also depending on where the coverage is provided. If the committee would like, I'm happy to provide a schedule of benefits.
And what do you do for people who work for you over 60? Does your private provider cover them? And do they offer any retirement benefits for coverage?
Regardless of age, as long as the employee is an active employee, they're part of our active employee insurance pool, so they don't pay anything extra regardless of the age they're on. We know there's some plans that do charge different amounts based on age. The plan we have doesn't do that. We do have a separate plan that is available to retirees, but as you can imagine, that's a very expensive plan, and not very many employees take that after retirement. And that's been an ongoing concern that certainly we at the airline have, because what happens to employees after they retire? I think it's a bit better with government. I believe civil servants, after they retire with a certain amount of tenure with the government, they do get some health coverage thereafter. But with Cayman Airways, as it is with most private sector companies, there is nothing that's provided after retirement, with the exception of Synico if it gets to the point where they're indigent and can't afford coverage.
Any other questions? Roy?
Thank you, sir. I'd like to go back to just confirm for me then that the total, for want of a better word, subsidy received from government is the 21 million in terms of strategic service support, and the 6 million in equity. Are there any other areas under these line items in your income statement or balance sheet where additional cash might be received from government?
No, sir.
Okay. The strategic, if I've heard you correctly, your strategic routes are New York, Chicago, Dallas. Am I correct?
Correct, and some Miami flights and some Tampa flights as well. So an example of that would be where we may decide as a company, we know we can fill the Miami flight on Friday evenings, and we know we can fill it on Sunday evenings coming back, but there's flights in the middle of the day that don't necessarily make a ton of sense for us, but they provide connectivity to Europe and to Western US, Canada, and so forth. And those are ones which would be also part of that tourism product.
Okay, so a city like Miami then isn't necessarily just a core route.
Correct.
For the entire schedule.
Correct, it's split.
Within it, you got individual flights that would be strategic.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then your other core routes, if I'm hearing correctly, Kingston, Montego Bay, Havana, Tampa, and La Ceiba.
That is correct.
That's correct? Okay.
Yes,
And if I may just add, because this is something that, for the benefit of the public, the airfare, for instance, to Kingston and Montego Bay is constantly compared, for instance, to the airfare to New York. And nobody can understand why it is that it costs more to go or come from Jamaica than it costs to go or come from New York. And the first answer is, of course, the output payment that we receive from the government is being applied to the New York route for strategic purposes to create the right fare. Because Jamaica does not fall within that element of our airlift framework, we do not apply that. What we charge on the route to Jamaica is the correct fare for us to cover our costs and make a normal profit on that. There is another component which also aggravates the pricing of a ticket to and from Jamaica, which is the component of taxes. So it is quite common to see an airfare to and from Jamaica in excess of 400 US. And in reality, 120 US is going to the Jamaican government. There's another 60 going to the Cayman Islands government, creating a tax burden of $180 on that $400 ticket, which leaves essentially for us a $220 airfare, which is not discounted or not having any kind of effect from the output payment received by the government. $220 is the fare that we need to charge for that route to pay for itself. So that was just an example to show how things work and how the output payment can in fact impact the pricing of the fares, and it's done strategically. There is no need for a strategic investment on an airfare to Jamaica because there is no tourists coming from Jamaica to make a spend here, which equates to $5,000 a week. That is not what obtains. So that's the logic.
This past summer, particularly on the Tampa route, I know that you moved to a daily flight. Can you tell the committee how did that, what were the results?
So last year, the Tampa route really did quite well for us, and we ran with a load factor between 80 and 90%, which essentially is somewhat sold out because people are going to want to travel on certain days, and it gets difficult then to sell tickets after that. Looking at those loads and looking at how Tampa was projecting, which was up for the summer, we decided, in conjunction with our board and government, to go ahead and put daily flights in for the entire summer. And we saw tremendous results. The Tampa airport worked very well with us. They put a lot of cash into advertising. The Department of Tourism put cash into promoting that as well, and so did Cayman Airways, and we saw a significant response. In 1 month alone, we saw an increase of 600 passengers over what we saw last year on that market, which is quite remarkable.
So by all accounts, it was a success. I mean, and did you consider those additional flights core or strategic?
We consider them core because a lot of the Tampa market is locals going to Florida for the summer vacation. But at the same time, there are tourists in Florida who want to come down here for a summer vacation as well. What we find is because of the numbers of locals going to Tampa, it doesn't leave a lot of seats for tourists to come down here. So by doing it this way, we were able to just extend what we currently offer. And that's kind of what we explained earlier with Tampa being mixed between core and some tourism in there as well.
From your experience, go ahead, sir.
If I might just add one tiny thing which will also help to illuminate the picture better. Wherever the Department of Tourism targets their spend in terms of their marketing spend, you will find that Cayman Airways will always have a very strong presence. So for instance, Tampa is not an area that is receiving a tremendous amount of marketing activity from the Department of Tourism. It's not really one of their target markets. Hence, it's automatically not going to be strategically a tourist source market. But what we have found from our own experience is that it's a route that really works well for us, hence why it's really categorized as core. But it still produces tourism. It still has that effect, but it's not within the DOT's target area per se. Correct.
Okay, thank you. Is management convinced now that Tampa can support a daily flight year-round?
I think long-term, that's where we intend to get to.
Okay.
This summer was a good test into that to see how it would sustain a daily service. So far, we obviously like what we're seeing, and we'll continue to evaluate. We're going to put daily service in, or have put daily service in for this winter season, for the Christmas period, so the heavy period between middle of December, middle of January. And depending on how that does, we'll make some plans for the next schedule change.
Okay. I do know, but I want to get back a bit too. We're talking about specific routes, but New York itself, I know shortly after we started flying, you had competition in the form of JetBlue come onto the market. I believe United also operates out of Newark, which is, to all intents and purposes, considered New York as well. Following this competition entering into the marketplace, what has been your experience in terms of the passenger traffic? Are they bringing their own, generating new sources of passengers, or were they just chipping away at the market that we had?
I think because of the DOT's focus on that area and the extent of marketing that they're doing and the good job that they're doing, they have actually managed to stimulate a level of demand that was beyond the capacity of Cayman Airways alone. So what we have found is that we now begin to coexist with other carriers, and the pie is essentially big enough for everybody to partake of it. And there is still more untapped, from my understanding of what the DOT says. There is still the ability to tap into those markets even more. What's important, though, is that if we do not maintain a presence with the foreign carriers, then the influence that we have on the pricing will, in fact, go away.
Disappear.
And then suddenly all of the DOT's hard work might be in vain, because the tourists will just not find this jurisdiction attractive unless the government then finds itself sitting down with these airlines and providing seat guarantees and payments for them and so on and so forth.
And does that same thing apply to Dallas?
Dallas has seen competition last summer and then this summer again. Prior to that, it was very much an untapped market. So we went into that market with the support of the government and the spend of the Department of Tourism. We saw some very strong results with that. We had one flight a week that first summer. The second summer, we decided to put 2 flights a week in there. That did well, not quite as well, but fairly well. Last year, then we had American with their 1 flight a week, and that came in. We didn't do as well last year, but we still didn't do bad. I think the total number of tourists coming out of that market was significant. This year, American saw the potential of the Dallas route and introduced 3 flights a week. We still had our 2, they had 3. Our loads were down slightly, but within about 200 passengers per month of where they were at the same time last year. So not horrible by any extent. In fact, what we saw in July in particular helped to provide the DOT with some of the strongest growth they've seen this, well, not some of the strongest tourism growth they've seen this year.
Historically, what tends to happen is Cayman Airways will open the gateway, work along with the DOT to stimulate the market, and then as the market grows, you'll find that the other carriers tend to come in. And sometimes over the long haul, Cayman Airways may stay with them, or sometimes Cayman Airways may decide, as happened many years ago with a route like Houston, what Cayman Airways decided is that although there is competition on the route and we're serving a purpose to keep the competition honest, what we found though was that there were other routes that needed to be developed, and we don't have unlimited resources. And a route like Houston takes an airplane and a crew away for an entire day because it's a 3.5-hour long flight. So Cayman Airways took a decision way back then that we need to start focusing our resources elsewhere. And this is where you see things like Chicago coming on the map for Cayman Airways, and then that development takes place and so on. So there's no given criteria which says that we will go and open a route, stay on it for a certain time until the other carriers come in and establish themselves. It's all about monitoring what's going on, and sometimes we'll stay for the long haul if it suits us or it suits the country, or sometimes we may decide, you know what, we're at a point where it's better for Delta to continue with Atlanta, and we will deploy our resources to go and develop somewhere else, as an example.
You may want to also add that, we welcome competition coming in here. We don't really see it as competition because obviously there are more ways for tourists to get to the Cayman Islands. So when you check in at the airport, we provide check-in service for United and quite a few other of the carriers that fly into and out of the Cayman Islands. And the ones we don't, we may provide counter space to, or we may provide maintenance services or other needed services for them to be able to operate in here. We welcome that, again, because it provides tourism to the Cayman Islands.
Mr. Chairman, through you, the seasonal routes that you do, what are those? Can you give us a summary of those?
Right now, the only seasonal route we're doing is Dallas. Chicago at one point had been a seasonal route. We've extended that to year-round service with the exception of September and October.
And you used to do Boston and DC as well, or a while ago?
That was, Boston was quite some time ago. I think that ended in 2006, if I recall correctly. And Washington, D.C. ended in, I want to say 2010, perhaps 2011. We ended up, the reason Washington slowed down was we ended up seeing competition come in there from United, who introduced twice weekly service out of Washington, D.C. D.C. being the capital of the United States, they tend to fly more national carriers than foreign carriers. So we were able to develop that market to get the interest about the Cayman Islands to that region. United came in, we were able to handle the market on their own, so we pulled that, and then we started looking at Dallas and other markets.
Good morning, Marlon Bispat, PwC partner. Nothing that's been said here is contradictory with what we observe as part of the audit.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just one more quick question. On the tail end of these financials, can you update us on whether or not the savings were materialized after relinquishing the lease and acquiring the 3 aircraft?
So if you look at the difference between the financials in 2013, where we had a loss of $6.8 million, and the financials in 2015, where we had a profit of $3.6 million, I believe it was. Yes, $3.64 million. That's a difference of some $10 million in there. One of the easy ways to account for that is obviously fuel prices came down, and that accounted for about $5 million of that $10 million difference. The other 5, however, came from the purchase of the aircraft and reduction in leasing costs and related to the actual lease, and then also the somewhat unnecessary maintenance reserves that we were being paid for events that would never occur that were part of the lease. So we did really start to see some benefits, and that's continuing to roll forward now into subsequent years as well.
I was going to change the subject if we were finished with that line of questioning, but I'd like to focus on the strategy going forward with regard to the implementation now of the new aircraft that I think will start to arrive in 2018. Am I correct?
That is correct. The first of the 4 737 MAX, -8 MAX, the brand new aircraft, arrives in December of 2018. Okay. Then there'll be 2 more deliveries in 2019. So for all intents and purposes, we'll be receiving 3 aircraft into service in 2019. Then there's a gap of 1 year from the 3rd aircraft to the 4th. So we'll receive that 4th MAX in the 4th quarter of 2020.
Okay. Now, I know that we were looking to source an 800 NG to take account for the expiration of the lease of what I think is the oldest aircraft in our fleet, the only one that we lease.
Right. We have 4 jets in operation, 4 737 jets in operation, 3 of which we purchased.
Right.
That's the transaction the CFO just referred to. The 4th is still on lease, and that lease expires in the 3rd quarter of next year. So what we have done is we needed to, if the MAXs were available to be introduced at that time, that would have been the right decision. But we're not intent to retire a classic aircraft and replace it with another classic aircraft.
Yeah.
So the logical thing to do was to use 737-800 NG as a bridge to the first MAX delivery. And what we wanted to do was not wait until it was too close to the actual retirement, but to bring that aircraft in ahead of time so we can have a normal transition and phase in without too much disruption and stress on our operation. And at the same time, what it will do is we essentially needed a fifth aircraft in any event, given the schedule that we operate right now. Our schedule is under a tremendous amount of pressure with the 4 airplanes, and when one is either running late for weather or whatever reason, or if there's a mechanical interruption which affects our schedule, it really takes quite a toll on our operation and creates a less than desirable experience for our customers. So the logic was to bring that 800 in before our busy winter season this year. And by the time we get to the third quarter of next year and we retire that first 737-300, then we'll have a fleet of 4 just as we have now. But the phasing of the 800 would have been done in a very structured and organized way.
Okay. Are those plans still on track then to bring an 800?
Those plans are still on track. The 800 is scheduled for delivery to us by the end of November. Of course, there's lots of fluidity in that, but we're confident that we will have it in service before December 15, which is when our busy season starts.
Okay. So, I mean, in terms of, it's a lot to induct, even if it is a different variant of the aircraft. I know there's a lot that needs to be done to get that in place and get all the approvals and everything else, because effectively it is a new aircraft. I think we were told before that this would not require any further financial assistance from the government to enable that to happen. Is that still the case?
That is still the case.
Okay. So we will get a fifth aircraft that essentially we will operate for about a year before one aircraft retires or will return to the lessor. That again will take us down to 4 aircraft. Is it your intention then to lease another bridge aircraft to keep us at 5 aircraft?
No. The fleet will only be at 5 for the period when we have the 800 that we're about to receive until we retire that first 300. Yeah. Then it goes to 4, and it will remain at 4 all the way through, because what happens after that is as a 737 MAX is introduced, then a 737-300 rolls out. Right. Now, I spoke a little bit earlier about the reliability and having 5 planes and so on. But when we go from having 4 classics to 3 classics and an NG, that is going to be a sizable improvement in reliability purely because of the influence of the 1 NG, how much more reliable that will be than the 300s. When we start to introduce the brand new aircraft, which are going to be so reliable, it's difficult to fathom. We're at a day and age now where aircraft that are produced now are benefiting from technology and experience and all the good stuff that has allowed them to refine, especially the 737, which is a model that has been around for so many years and constantly being refined. All of the design features now are really aimed at making that the most reliable aircraft ever built. So we're really looking forward to seeing a level of reliability with 4 new MAX aircraft, which would equal us having 5 or maybe even 6 737 classics to operate any given schedule. We would have needed more of the classics to support the schedule as we would a new airplane. Not sure if that makes sense to
it does make perfect sense to me. Yesterday, JetBlue introduced first scheduled flight to Cuba in probably close to more than 50 years. Other airlines in America have been given authority and are going to start to introduce their own services from various points in the U.S. into Havana and other points throughout Cuba. Now, do you anticipate any significant effect on Cayman Airways operations as a result of that, with particular the Havana route that we operate?
There are many different considerations in that particular equation, and not everything that appears to be the case is actually the case with that market. So what we have been doing for some time is being in a state of readiness to adjust our capacity to suit any changes in demand that may take place. What I can say, and this has been the mainstay of our focus in terms of how Cayman Airways assess the whole situation, what I can say is that our inclinations are so far holding true. And this has a degree of commercial sensitivity, but I think it needs to be said, so I'll just give a little bit of explanation here now. We had a situation where there were flights between South Florida, being Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and Havana, which there was demand which supported in the region of 13 to 14 charter flights per day. And this has been in place for many years. So there are charter flights that operate directly between Miami and Havana in a region of 13 to 14 per day. The demand that was there was way in excess of those 13 or 14 flights. So that created an arena for other players such as Cayman Airways, Aeromexico, Bahamas Air, to play in, where they would transport individuals who can legally travel between Cuba and the US over other gateways. So what we tend to do, or what we have been doing for many years quite successfully, is we have been moving Spanish passport holders who travel to the United States under the ESTA visa waiver program, primarily from Havana to Miami and back. Now, the US decided that it's going to start regularizing diplomatic relations with Cuba. Cuba played along, and they got to the point where they decided that scheduled flights will now be allowed. And they put a cap on the number of scheduled flights that could operate between the United States and Havana per day, and that cap is 20. So 20 flights are allowed from Havana to anywhere in the US. Now, the US Department of Transport has awarded those routes, and they have awarded some frequencies daily out of places like New York, Chicago, Tampa, LA, right across the US. And they're now left with only 10 frequencies to South Florida. So it's going from 13 or 14 that exists now to 10. And why I say it's going that way is because the charter market and the schedule market generally do not coexist in the same arena very well. Because the charter outfits, they used to charter the airlines that are now operating scheduled services. It's the same American Airlines and JetBlue and these carriers that are now providing their own scheduled service that used to provide the chartered service. So in essence, very little has changed. In effect, what's happened is the capacity has now diminished and the demand is now growing. So we have to continue to watch what's going on, because it may not necessarily mean that there's going to be any substantial reduction in demand, which could have a negative effect on us. There is another dynamic, however, which is temporarily at least in the equation, and that is the issue of introductory pricing. So whereas the demand may still be there, the yield from that route might not support us continuing with it the way we do now. So it may require some adjustments. So the moral of that story is that I think you will agree there is actually more to what's immediately visible, and that is something that we just have to watch very carefully and see how it unfolds. So far, we're seeing things unfold exactly the way we thought it would. But like I said in the beginning, we remain ready to make the necessary adjustments to pull back. Havana is a core route, and whereas it makes a positive contribution, if it starts to be a situation where we would lose money, then we're not in a position to apply any of government's output payments to support those losses. So what it would mean is a contraction or discontinuation of that service to avoid losing any money on that service.
Just out of interest, I mean, is there any opportunity for us to do a Cayman, Havana, Miami service?
Cayman,
and would there be a merit?
Havana, Miami.
Yeah.
Okay. The Havana, Miami portion is referred to as a fifth freedom. It's a flight from a country, which is a third country, to another third country. That itinerary does not involve Cayman. So we would, in order to do that, we would have to have the blessings of both the US government and the Cuban government. And those blessings come about through air service negotiations, which would have to be done on our behalf by the UK government. So there would be 3 governmental parties involved. However, we know on certain days there is good demand between Cayman and Havana all on its own. There is good demand on the weekends. And we also know that virtually on every other day of the week, there is good demand between Havana and Miami. So although we don't have those approvals now, what I can say is that for some time we have been exploring how to obtain these approvals. And we basically have already addressed the US side of it, and we're now working on the Cuban side of it. So that's actually something that is in work. Again, that's a little bit commercially sensitive, but the question's been asked and I have obligation to give a good answer.
Thank you.
How is the route Miami, Cayman Brac, Havana, Cayman Brac, Miami? Is that strategic?
No, that is definitely core. Cayman Airways does that purely for the merit in terms of profit that it can produce for Cayman Airways. Saturday was a day that we had never offered that service on. It was the one day of the week, and it was because the congestion that exists or has existed on a Saturday at the Owen Roberts International Airport was such that in the middle of the day we could not add to that contention. With the Charles O'Connell International Airport becoming certified for international use to the US, Havana, various places like that, it created a good opportunity for us to actually test on that day. Initially, of course, we started out with Holguin because Holguin was somewhere that we were also looking at possibly to add frequencies out of Grand Cayman. But the two things came together at the same time. So we said with Holguin being an eastern province in Cuba and with Cayman Brac being closer to Holguin than Grand Cayman, we would actually have a shorter route that we could charge the same airfare for. That would have needed, in our initial business case, about 3 months to try and develop that route. It started off doing fairly well, but not as well as we would have liked, and we decided, which was always our original plan, that we knew there would be a safe fallback if the test did not work. A lot of what we do in the airline business is it involves some degree of testing. So it means we go into a route on the premise that it may or it may not work. And we know what our fallback is going to be. So our fallback for that was to convert the Holguin route to Havana. At the same time, we also had some frequencies into Havana, which were overnight frequencies. We had 2 per week, and we discontinued those at the same time. Not because they were not doing well, but there's so many dynamics within the airline industry. What happened now was Cuba itself or Havana is doing so well with tourism that the rates for the hotel rooms suddenly went from like $100 to $300. And imagine us having 3 flight attendants and 2 pilots five crew, and our overnight expense suddenly goes from 500 to 1,500, and so that's an extra 1,000. And the margins are not very big in the airline business, believe it or not. So an extra 1,000 on one rotation can make or break, that flight. So one of the things that we decided to do was to scale back our operation, have that demand trickle onto the remaining flights, which were day flights, because the overnight expense was too expensive. It also meant then that by dropping 2 Havana frequencies, converting Holguin to Havana was a sure bet that Havana would in fact do well, or fallback would do well. And at this point, with the CFO's concurrence, I would say that's probably our best route at this time in terms of loads.
So what's your average load factor on that flight?
At this point, definitely for the summer here, I would say it's probably been in the 90% region. 90s, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just amazed at what you're telling. Some of the things, a little bit of things that I'm picking up here when you talk about 70, 80, 90% load factor. That strikes me as just being a huge improvement in overall in airlines' performance over what it may have been just a few short years ago, where we were struggling to get to 50, and the goal was to get to 60. Is that across the entire network that you're getting those kinds of load factors?
Let me speak to that. The average system-wide is about 60%. Some of the numbers we're talking about, 70, 80, 90, are the summer peak period. So we do get to those heavy loads during then, Christmas, and some other busy periods as well. We do have some flights that don't deliver as well as we would like. Dallas is one of those that slowed down a bit this last summer, but still between 50 and 60%, so not horrible, and doing the job of what it's there for, to bring tourists to the Cayman Islands. But we are seeing some really good growth in a lot of our markets. And when we look at our forward bookings now for the next 8 months, we are excited about what we see. We see New York, Chicago, a lot of our tourism routes that are really picking up. Cayman Rec, believe it or not, is projecting the most growth we've seen in its history. So we're really expecting big things happening in sister islands.
Just one other little thing that tends to give a false impression sometimes as well is we adjust our frequencies depend on the season to match the demand, which fluctuates with seasonality. But on any given day of the week as well, certain flights will have a very high demand, but it is in one direction. So as a very good example of that is if you would like to go to Miami on a Friday night from Grand Cayman, most of the time it's very difficult to get a seat. Those flights are going out in excess of a 90% load factor. But they're coming back to Grand Cayman at maybe a 30 or 40% load factor. So the net result is that flight as a pair delivers a 65% load factor. And this is one of the challenges that we have. So you will hear about the 90% load factors that we're experiencing on certain flights and certain rotations, but there are inherent shortcomings in terms of the demand not being uniformly distributed, which is going to bring the averages down.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just backtracking a little bit, as far as the 800 that you're expecting in November, is that just for, how long is that lease for?
24 months extendable to 26. So basically it's a year.
Okay,
2 years,
so you
years.
could actually phase out 2 of the 737-300s then? Or do you plan to add another 800 to fill that gap?
When that 800 goes, we will be introducing the first new MAX, 8-8 MAX, in 2018, late 2018. And at that time, 2 of the 300s that we have would have been retired.
And you're confident that the reliability of the 800 MAX will compensate for the addition of fifth airplane is what you said earlier.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Okay, thanks.
If not, I'd like to thank Mr. Worms, the CEO, and Mr. Tibbetts, the CFO, for attending. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, too.
Thank you for the invitation.
We don't have any confirmation from the chairman for attending this afternoon. The last communication that the staff has is that he has another appointment to make a presentation to the Department of Tourism. With the consent of the committee, having this been the second attempt to reschedule the chairman, I'd like the authority to issue a summons for him to appear at 9 o'clock next Wednesday morning prior to us starting the HSA.
Mr. Chair, is it possible to do it in the afternoon instead of the morning? And
We can do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Would suit you better?
that would be better
Okay.
for me.
Could I ask the clerk then to make sure that the relevant authority within the parliament issues the summons to the chairman of Cayman Airways to appear before this Public Accounts Committee at 2 p.m. Wednesday, the 7th of September. And therefore, the committee is adjourned now until 10 o'clock Wednesday, the 7th. No, at 10 o'clock we have the HSA. We have the HSA. We have rescheduled for their convenience for 10 o'clock Wednesday, the 7th of September. So the committee is adjourned until 10 a.m. Wednesday, 7th of September.